Hello and welcome to a Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and I'm back this week with a brand new podcast. This week, I'm speaking about the warrior archetype. We've spoken before about the king archetype of the king, warrior, magician, lover sequence of archetypes of the human being. This week, I'm carrying on that series, and I'm going to dive in deeper into these characteristics that, for me, I'm fascinated by. I know I use that word on a regular basis, and it will continue a theme throughout these podcasts, but I am genuinely interested in these areas of who we are as human beings and why we do the things we do, and that we are still have these fundamental factors to us that bring out certain characteristics, energies, and are maybe somewhat less acceptable in today's age. So the warrior archetype itself, warrior starting with it containing the word war within it. So the definition of the warrior archetype is in itself conflict and waging war. And it doesn't necessarily mean like physically waging war. That would have been the old days. We would have waging war. The warrior archetype would be the warriors of the armies, and they would be consistently fighting and battling, and the best warrior was the man who stood the longest and had the most victories. And nowadays in the West, the warrior archetype is now looked down upon, and has been voices of today's society are screaming for the destruction of the warrior archetype, and are instead looking for a more soft masculine rather than the strong masculine, or the fullness of the warrior rather than the sadist or the masochist that comes with the sort of shadow warrior archetype. We'll get into that though. So the warrior archetype can be divided in two, and then divided into again within the sadist and the masochist for the shadow archetype. The warrior in his fullness and accessing that warrior is somebody who is able to have certain characteristics, and that doesn't necessarily go too much within the shadow archetype. The shadow archetype contains two sides. You've got the sadist and you've got the masochist, and I'll go into the definition for those two later. But what is the warrior in himself? Well, the warrior is somebody who goes out into the land on behalf of the king in this circumstance, because a good king is a warrior, lover, magician, and all in one. But the warrior himself works on behalf of the king, and he goes out and he searches the land, and he saves maidens, and he conquers dangerous dragons and monsters in order to expand the territory and to help the bigger picture other than himself, and even in sacrifice of his own life or her life in any context. And it's very easily misconstrued that the warrior archetype is male. It's not. It can be male and female. This is a characteristic. This is a archetype of every human being. You have the ability to go into these. So the warrior archetype also has another definition. The warrior is depicted as the courageous hero, and he's also depicted as a physical representation of strength and prowess, and the ability to stand up for the rights that person believes in. So it's not just about conquering land and going on conquests and becoming Saint George or a saint in itself. It's about the ability to stand up for what you believe in. Now, it's really interesting, this warrior archetype, because for me, I genuinely think that at some point in my life, I've definitely fallen into the shadow archetypes, especially the masochist in some ways, in where it's really fascinating how the warrior in his fullness has this ability to control himself, and has the ability to look into these characteristics and these aspects such as like loyalty and skillfulness and decisiveness, all of these things, but at the same time he doesn't blame others, and he doesn't, like, when you're accessing that full warrior archetype, you become something much greater. So what is the mature warrior? So what's the warrior in his fullness? Because this is the important definition, because you've got, when you're growing up as a kid, we in the West nowadays don't have this defining ritual of going from boys to men. We used to, in tribal sense, have the ability to have, when you're turning into a man, when you become a man, I don't know what it was back then. I would have thought, if it was in the younger years, because back in the really tribal times, you were becoming a man at 13, 14, because you were going from being a child into the masculine, going through puberty and becoming a man. And they'd have these rituals where the boy would have to venture into some darkness, something dangerous, in order to get the tribal leaders to recognize him as a man and a member of that clan or that tribe. And so nowadays we don't have anything like that. We are sort of floating in this grey area as men and women, for that matter, and it's a difficult time because we don't know where we stand. We can all say that we think we're doing the right thing, but we don't necessarily know for a fact. We can follow guidelines and we can follow the best ways of doing things, and I'm going to read out some of the characteristics in a minute of the fullness of the warrior. But we can't, up to this point, we've never been led by others. We've never, we've got our parents, we've got those in our community, but these communities aren't as tribal as they used to be. We don't know people as well as we used to. We don't know the land that we're on as well as we used to. There is less of more people are moving about. Because of that moving about, there's also this lack of community as well, especially within the Western society. It's kind of sad to see, because obviously there's some lacking areas. I'm not one to judge. I genuinely have no stake in this at all. For me personally, I love the fact that I'm very close with all of my friends, my best friends. I consider them brothers, because with brothers you can share anything and you can be open. And that's what I'm trying to create, is a tribe, is a way to have people open the door to a new life, where they have a community, they have someone to talk to. It's a very disconnected world we live in today. Anyway, enough about that. So the mature masculine, we've talked about what the warrior archetype is and what the warrior does. We haven't said what it constitutes. So what sort of things does the warrior attend to, and what do they do? Well, we know, there's the Christian law that comes up. You've got many of the, the 10 Commandments and all of those things, but the warrior archetype more resembles with a lot of the Eastern religions. It resembles, in Buddhist case, the Dharma. It resembles with the Tao as well, and it also resembles with the Mahat, which actually have a lot more resemblance to the characteristics of the warrior, because the Tao considers life in a way where whatever happens, you have the ability to sort of control what you can and control what you can't. And it's really interesting. I get daily Tao quotes on a regular basis every day, and they always come up with a way for you to get some perspective, to really think about what's going on, how things can get blown out of proportion pretty quickly. And it's very interesting to see this, because we can all take little things and make big things out of them. So as the warrior, you're looking to be more big picture, be more mindful. So yeah, the spiritual and psychological path through life, that is what these resemble. That psychological ability to go through life without being fazed by the external world. Because there's so much going on in the external world right now. There's so many things for people to get distracted by. It's very interesting to think about that, because for me personally, you've got social media, you've got YouTube, you've got all of these things which are great to some extent, but they're also distractors. They are, look at this, new content everywhere. And you've got to think to yourself, like, you can only see so much. And on top of that, there's a whole world out there that, because we've all had COVID for the last year and a half, none of us have been able to see. And it feels like it's just within touching distance. So, yeah, enough going off on a tangent. The psychological path is very interesting. And these are the characteristics of the warrior. Purpose. Looking for that, we talked about earlier the warrior going out on behalf of the king. When you have purpose in your life, when you have goals, when you have structure, it makes it so much easier to be able to gain that valuable insight in how you're doing. And I'm fascinated to see, how people can just go through life and not have any goals, and they just go, and that's fine. But it's really interesting to see. So a warrior has purpose. He's mindful, or she's mindful, and mindfulness is difficult. Everyone talks about it. Everyone talks about meditation nowadays. I do myself, and we all talk about the ability to just detach and be thoughtful of others. But in the moment, can you truly say that you've done that? It's such a difficult thing, because feelings and emotions determine that mindfulness. Adaptable. The ability to adapt to different environments, to be able to go into a different place and not be just completely lost. The ability to understand and go in and adapt. Adapting has its limits as well. So something really interesting to adaptation is, like, you can go into a new place, right? And you can be there for months and you can get to it. But if there's a point where you can't understand something, you can't get to grips with it, it becomes harder and harder to be able to get beyond it. Language, in this case, can be that case. If you don't get the language, if you don't get, and you don't have a teacher to be able to show you the way, you can become more lost. So the adaptation to an environment can work, but sometimes as a warrior, it may not. Minimalist. I love this one. Minimalism has become a big thing in Western culture recently. Something that's been coming up on YouTube a lot. I see I'm a big fan of Matt Diavella, who has shown a lot around minimalism, like wearing less, buying less clothes, buying less things. I myself totally agree with him. I've got rid of so much stuff over the past year and a half, minimalising the amount of stuff I have, just getting it down to the stuff that I use on a daily basis, like books I read, the computer I use every day, the mobile phone that I think my phone's like £100. Like, I don't invest in these things because I know they're going to get broken. And for my laptop, like the laptop I've had for 5 years now. And I invest in these things that I'm going to use on a regular basis, and I make sure that I don't buy stuff that is just not going to get used or thrown in the bin. It's taken me a very long time to get to that point, but it works out for the best, because clutter is the worst. I've seen it at the moment, like in the garage and in, like, if you go into your home and you just look into the spaces where just there's things, it distracts you as well. It's another distraction. So minimalism is key to clearing your mind of the clutter as well as physical. Being decisive is difficult as well. I spoke with one of my best friends, Alex Young, over the weekend, and he said it should take a decision should be taken within 3 seconds. It should only take 3 seconds for you to decide to do something. After that, it becomes harder and harder, and you lose the ability to make that decision. It's a fantastic way of putting it. It really resembles with me, and I think, Ali, if you're listening, that's fantastic advice for people who want to make a decision on something, to get it in their head, and to, just go out and do. Because everyone does a lot of talking, but not a lot of acting. If you want to go do something, do it. If you want to run, if you want to work out, if you want to learn a new language, if you want to go to a new place, if you want to do a new job, if you want to, it could become the other thing where it becomes sort of erratic. And I totally understand that. There is that. It can become an erratic behavior, but also at the same time, you can become somebody who is an action person, and people will start to respect you because they know you as somebody who is a person of action and is somebody who gets things done and isn't just doing the talking. Talky. Skillful is an interesting one, right? Because the warrior that you think of, right? You think skillful in the old days, like sword, bow, the ability to wield, all of these weapons, and the ability to go and go into the battles and have the ability to command men, and that, you consider all of those as skills. But in today's society, it's reading, writing, communication, the ability to go on a computer and work it, and all of these things. I'm genuinely interested in the monk lifestyle, because if you want to apply the warrior archetype to something, there is warrior monks, and I always think to myself, well, they don't have access to computers, they don't do any of our social media, and they don't have mobile phones, and they don't have cameras, and they don't do all of these things that we all do on a regular basis in the West. And it makes me think, what skill do they consider a skill? What is a skill in that sense? It does seem that skills all depend on the environment to some sort of extent. But who knows? We can always just put it down to the ability to do, and the ability to have the skills and the assets and the knowledge. Knowledge is key there, to go into a new environment and have that adaptability we spoke about earlier, and have the skills to do that. Loyalty is hard to come by. Loyalty is very hard to come by nowadays. No one is loyal to companies, for good reason as well, because companies don't offer positive lifestyles, the majority of them. If you hear the sort of phrase 9 to 5, a lot of people will think of that as a negative thing. It is because of corporations in that sense, and I'm not anti-capitalism at all. I'm very much capitalist, but they've become their own worst enemies. Because what they've done is they've made such an efficiency plan for companies nowadays, big companies, that when it comes down to the individual, 9 to 5 just rings as a negative. So loyalty nowadays is just not built within these companies. It can be built within individuals, within friendships. That's, that it's great to see, but I do hear within today's society as well, people are more disconnected. I will repeat that over and over again because I see it over and over again. People saying that they have less friends and they have smaller groups of people, which isn't a bad thing. It may mean that the loyalty is increased, but it's still fascinating to think about how society is actually decreasing the loyalty and not increasing it in the work side of things. Within friendships, it can also become, loyalty can be difficult as well. A little bit of a statistic for the workplace. I'm pretty sure that in order for somebody to be able to get a pay rise, a significant pay rise, you have to leave a company every 2 to 3 years in order to move on and go up higher in the hierarchy. That doesn't build loyalty at all. So we have created a system here where there is lacking in that area in the workplace. Friendships nowadays, a lot of people are looking for something in return. There's a lack of just being friends, to enjoy, to communicate, to have things in common, to do things together. It's more about, what can I get from this person? What can I get? How can I just chat and be the only one talking, instead of gaining knowledge and gaining that ability to learn from others. So yeah, I find it intriguing, to say the least, to think about how loyalty is seen nowadays. Being disciplined. Now this one, I love discipline. Discipline, as Jocko Willink said, discipline equals freedom. And that is, without a doubt, something to live by. The ability to get up, have a routine, a healthy routine. Routine that's going to help you, not hinder you. The best one for you as well, because I talk about my routine regularly. Doesn't necessarily it's going to fit anyone else's. It's not templates. You've got to figure out for yourself to some extent. So there's information out there. If you need help, ask for it. It shall be given. It's just the ability to look and figure out for yourself before you move into that area of undiscipline where life is consistently all over the place. You're wondering why things are going down the drain. Why me? Why this? Why that? And the truth is because you're not, applying that discipline to your life and doing all the healthy things you should do. So yeah, discipline. So, as well as discipline and the ability to continuously go through the motions and the ability to sometimes do things you don't want to do. I mean, to an extent, right? We all have to do things we don't want to do, but that doesn't mean you should be doing it for the entirety of your life. Life is for living. Yes, there are steps to get to places, but there's also being sane and the ability to understand that in certain steps are good for you, certain steps aren't necessarily good for you. And you can be going around in circles doing the same thing over and over again, getting no results and wondering why, So there's that. Then there's emotional detachment. And they go hand in hand, discipline and emotional detachment as well, because emotional detachment is about being able to, be stoic, have that stoicism. Again, spoke about this with my best mate yesterday. It's really important to be able to emotionally detach from a situation. And it's not easy at all. It's really difficult because all you want to do, sometimes if someone's annoying you, you want to, shout, scream, all of these things. You want to tell them the truth. I want to tell them all of these things that I want to think about. But the truth is that, is it going to help the situation? Is it going to put you in a good place? And the majority of the time, the answer is no. We will talk about in a bit the shadow archetypes of that characteristic, because emotional detachment can lead into some really negative aspects as well. So there's that. So emotional detachment, positive, is the ability to do things on a day-to-day basis and not let the external, and when I say the external, I mean things you can't control, affect you. And allow the things that you can control to be healthy and for you to feel good at the end of it. Because, and yes, there's a level of pain you have to take when it comes to like exercise and going through work you don't want to do. And it sucks and it's grim and you're like, I don't want to do this, but you still have to do it anyway. The ability to get through that is like a mental toughening, and it is what it is, sadly, and you can't put it any other way. Good examples of the warrior archetype. When you think of the warrior, you think in the movies of Braveheart, and you're thinking Gladiator, and you're thinking the warrior from Tom Hanks in the Japanese movie Samurai, and you're thinking about The Last Mohican. You're thinking the king archetype represents Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, but he also has that warrior archetype as well. And so you've also got lots of different fictional characters who resemble this archetype, who you can use as an example to become more full in that warrior aspect. It's really important to understand that there are good examples out there in fiction. I love, I do talk about a lot of non-fiction books. I do read a lot of non-fiction books, but my favourites in fiction can have the similar aspect of going into the unknown, slaying some demons, and becoming stronger on the way out. So there is that. And the more comfortable you are as well, I have noticed this for me as well. If I get into a comfort zone, I start to degrade because you're in the same space. I think Jim Carrey said, depression and boredom are your brain telling you it's time to change avatar. And I really like that. I really like that idea of the ability to switch between some role, some job, some area of your life that you've done. You've got so much out of it. And we all think, and this is a common theme I've seen in society, is that you work, you eat, you sleep, you repeat, you get married, you have kids, you die. And you do a 9 to 5 and you do 25 years of different companies or the same company or whatever you want. And there's that standard way of living, and it's just, this just consistent buzz of, grey. And I love that Jim Carrey says that, because the ability to change up, to shake up that ball and see the world change, oh man, it's so important. And I think, I felt that recently, and I'm really intrigued to see where that feeling takes me. So I'm looking forward to changing up my life soon as well. And with COVID slowly being pushed back, I'm not, I don't want to put anything on camera that's going to bite me later on, but I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping that the world is going to change and therefore allow some new decisions to be made for new life to occur. And that's, again, new life is something that the warrior protects. New life and new beginnings. So there is that. There's also characters like David Goggins. I speak about him on a regular basis. He is the warrior in all essence. He consistently goes to extremes, but he is the best warrior to look up to, but he's also a little sadistic in some ways. I say that not because I want to look down on his achievements, they're not. It's just that there's a level of emotional detachment there that's too far. And we'll talk, I'm going to talk about that in a second, because we've got good examples here, like in Braveheart, when you have a warrior leading you and you have this character who is saying, if you just had one chance to take your lives, they can take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. And that's that line in itself, and the energy and the example he sets for others, it makes people want to follow. And I think this is, again, we see this in the army as well, in these leaders. It's the ability to be a captain in the army and go into a completely different industry and be able to adapt and go in and just do. I find it really interesting because there's a level of adaptability there of just being you can teach a technical skill, but you can't teach leadership. And I've seen that, like the difference between a leader I've seen who was from the army, he didn't have any, like his technical knowledge was down here, but I've met guys who are like technically up here, but their leadership is just, you just can't, it's non-existent. And so it's really intriguing to see how the good example of a warrior can set that standard for others. So moving on to the shadow archetypes. Yeah, I know. This is the darker side. This is the side we have to avoid. And we're going to start with the sadist. The sadist is somebody who takes emotional detachment too far. They have no understanding of those around them. They think that everybody should just get over it, should just be able to get through the emotions, should be able to just take the pain and continue. They don't have any compassion. They treat everybody like a soldier. They treat everybody like they're part of their army, and that there is no compassion at all. It's the word that keeps coming up in my head over and over again, because a good warrior, he has the ability to have all those characteristics, but also at the same time doesn't take it too far. The sadist can be cruel. Even the most vulnerable, he disdains the weak. A commanding officer in the army may try to rigidly run his family in the same way that he leads his troops. The sadist creates unattainable high standards for himself and those around him. When a child comes home with a less than perfect grade, a father influenced by the sadist will put her down and berate her mercilessly. A man with a positive warrior energy would have kindly shown disappointment, but then offered to help the daughter study for the next exam so he could ace it. This is it here. The ability to not get angry, but to help as well. If you want someone to get better, you don't just tell them they're the problem. You tell them how they can solve the problem. And you can't just leave them on their own to try and figure out, because the same will happen over and over again. You have to be engaged. You have to be there for that person. It's very difficult to do because not everyone's willing to put that effort in. That's how it is. Opens the door to the demon of cruelty. The sadist opens the door to the demon of cruelty. Think about that for a second. I always, think about that as a kid. The ability for an adult to get so angry they become that demon. They become cruel. I've seen adults angry. I've never seen, I've never seen somebody truly be cruel out of just doing the cruelty. And I've seen horrors. I've seen bad people, but I've never seen that where children are the result. And it's out there. You hear about it. You hear through the news and through society. But I've not seen it. The masochist. Now, this one, I think there's actually a more relatability in this one than there is in the sadist. The sadist is kind of psychopathic to some extent, and we don't have many of those in society. It's actually a very low percentage, but they are there nonetheless. Masochists, on the other hand, I think there's a higher level. Now, the definition of a masochist is actually somebody who enjoys cruelty. A person who's gratified by pain, degradation, that is self-imposed or imposed by others. In this case, I think what Robert Moore's described in the masochist sense is actually somebody who's been walked all over and then wants to inflict the pain that he or she's been walked all over by on others. It's as if somebody's been bullied and then they bully others because they've had that bullying themselves. It's that's horrible cycle, and doesn't talk about the pain, doesn't talk about the infliction of pain by others, and instead just has it like a rebound. You just reflect that pain. Cruelty with passion and the coward within. So the masochist is also somebody who genuinely has cowardice within them. You'll see in movies and films and books and all literature that the character who's actually the most cowardly is also the most cruel. Grimmauld Wormtongue's a really good one from The Lord of the Rings. He's cruel. He takes pleasure in seeing others suffer. And he, even in his love for somebody like Arwen, he uses cold, calculating words to almost degrade her into trying to love him. So there is that shadow archetype is there, and I think there's more of that in society, and people just feeling like, ooh, poor me, society's hurt me, look at that, oh no. And it's not like that at all. It's not the world's fault that you're suffering, and it may not be your fault either, but if it's something you can control it. If it's not, then don't take it out on others. And I'm saying that to myself as much as I am to other people, by the way. This is very important because it's self-reflection. It's taking this ability to not take your energy out on other people is really difficult. It's something that takes a long time to be able to control. When I feel myself becoming out of bounds, I can feel that anger, because I'm not able to be on the same emotional level as everyone else. Everyone else is happy and I'm not, and I'm thinking about something. I have to go and either do an action, I have to do something like it. I need to work out, or I need to get rid of that emotion. And the best way to do that is either for me to put some work in, or to go work out, or to go to a new place for that matter, to go into a new environment and adapt and try something new, to be able to get rid of that. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but it's something that I've worked out over time. So there's that. So those are the two shadow archetypes. We've talked about those, and I've not gone into great detail because each one of these archetypes has their own shadow archetype, and each one of them has more and more detail. And as we go into the other characteristics of the magician and the lover, you'll see those as well. And the series will conclude in almost like referring back to the king and the overall accessing of all of these archetypes in one. So how do we access the warrior? Well, we talked about those characteristics earlier: being loyal, being detached, being emotionally stable, being the purposeful person that you want to be, the ability to be skillful, to be making decisions on a regular basis. One thing I do want to go back on decisions as well. I said about making quick decisions earlier. There can be the shadow archetype of that as well, where apparently we make decisions in our heads like all the time throughout the day, and it's subconscious, and so you're using energy like click, 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 click every time you make a decision. And so there's like, yes, be decisive in those decisions, but the shadow archetype is just like continuously making decisions and then going back on them and then replaying, and then you're like all over the place because you're making decisions consistently. And I only realized this when I was reading a 30 Days with the Monks by Jesse Itzler, and he was talking about how he'd come back from the monastery that he'd stayed in for 30 days, and society was just so fast, and he was so detached and so away from it that he didn't realize like how many decisions were being made and how much energy was being sucked from you because of those decisions. So think of that when you're thinking of the shadow archetypes as well, because there's also these characteristics can be reflected and have the other side to them. So as well as being detached, we're also compassionate and appreciative and generative, what am I talking about? Generous, and the ability to look at others and see where they're coming from. Because a good warrior doesn't just fight for no reason, he fights for others as well as himself or herself. And it's very difficult to say. It's easy to say that and not so easy to do, because as a young person I don't have, I've got my family, I've got my friends, and that's easy to say I fight on their behalf. It's a lot harder when you have kids or when you have a wife and you're having to fight through life on their behalf as well as your own, and you have that responsibility. So yeah, it's going to be much harder when I have that on my hands. We'll fight the good fight in order to make the world a better place. Now that is something I am trying to do on a daily basis, trying to continuously make the right decisions and do things that I think are going to help the world. There's so many things that I want to do. I don't want to just continuously be in the same place. I want to go to different countries. I want to go do like Jesse did. I want to stay in be a monk for a while, because there's so many aspects of life that are worth diving into, and we don't get enough time in life to be able to not make those decisions and not do those things. I always think, what's the point in just having a taste of one pudding when there's so many puddings out there? It'd be like saying you're gonna, you get a choice at the beginning. You're like, I'm just gonna have, vanilla ice cream for the rest of my life. You're like, but there's so many flavors, and you don't try any of the others. You're just like, I'm stuck with vanilla. What sort of life is that? It's just, oh man, I'm just thinking about it now. It's crazy. So fight the good fight, but also have that ability to see the world as a multicolored perspective, and you're fighting for all of these aspects, not just the one that you're seeing. Our war making will be the creation of the new and the just and the free. I'm going to say that again. Our war making will be for the creation of the new, the just and the free. That's it, man. Conflicts, fights, the tough times, they're done to create new things, to fight for freedom, to be just, to do the good things. Man, so unappreciated, like the freedom we have today, and it's so important to remember these things. So that is a lovely line to end on. Our war making will be for the creation of the new, the just and the free. I've said it 3 times. I would say it 1 billion times more because it's so important. So I'll end on that really positive note. This has been a Taylor's Tales podcast. This has been Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and this has been the Warrior Archetype.